They say power corrupts. But that's only true if you've never had a rusted lever under your bridge and a town's future in your palm. When Candace Whitaker, the HOA president of Pinecrest Estates and self-appointed guardian of lakeside aesthetics, told me I had 30 days to remove the wooden bridge on my family's land, I didn't argue. I just blinked at her from beneath my straw hat and said, "Sure thing, Mrs. Whitaker, I'll get right on that." She smiled like she'd just won a court case and strutted back to her white Mercedes, high heels crunching gravel like she was squashing rebellion beneath designer soles. That bridge wasn't just wood, it was a monument. But here's the thing. Some bridges weren't built to be pretty. They were built to hold secrets. And when petty politics meets plumbing, things can get messy. Drop a comment if you've ever tangoed with HOA madness, the kind that starts with a friendly notice and ends with you Googling how to file a restraining order against a clipboard. Trust me, this story doesn't go where you think it's headed. Sunset Lake isn't massive, maybe 2 football fields end to end, but size never mattered when it came to leverage. It's the only water source for both my farm and the Sunset Vista Resort across the shore. 2 sides of the same lake, 2 completely different realities. I grow carrots and patch fences, they sip cocktails and post sunset selfies. But what they don't know is this lake doesn't just reflect pretty skies, it reflects ownership. And that ownership? Well, it gets a little muddy once you start poking under the bridge. Now, I've lived on this land my whole life, and I've seen plenty of things rot, fence posts, old tractors, the occasional political campaign, but I never thought I'd see common sense decay so fast. Candace waved her clipboard like it was the Constitution and said, "This bridge is obstructing the lake's visual harmony." I said, "Ma'am, this bridge has stood longer than your marriage, and I'd bet it's held up better too." She didn't flinch. According to Section 12B of the HOA's amended Community Landscape Ordinance, any structure within visual proximity of a designated aesthetic corridor must be pre-approved. Visual proximity. Aesthetic corridor. My ears rang like I'd just heard a man try to explain jazz using tax code. She didn't care that the bridge was on my land, didn't care that my grandfather died fishing off that bridge, didn't care that it fed into my irrigation system. No, the bridge was ugly, and ugly, in HOA terms, is basically terrorism. Later that night, I walked the length of that bridge with a flashlight and a bourbon, trying to calm the storm in my gut. My grandfather used to call it the quiet connector, said it linked more than just land. I thought it was nostalgia until my boot scraped something under the center beam. A metal plate, half swallowed by moss. Curious, I crouched down and cleared it with an old handkerchief. Beneath it, a lever and a gear system. Rusted, but intact. I gave it a twist. Nothing. Sprayed it with oil, tried again. That time I heard a sound like the earth exhaling. Water moving. Not fast, but steady. I followed the sound down past the sycamores, past the old stone fence, and there it was. A narrow trench at the edge of my field, suddenly wet, trickling like it hadn't in years. My grandfather hadn't just built a bridge. He'd built a hidden water control system, a failsafe, a secret safeguard buried beneath a plank, and a promise. I tore through the old filing cabinet in the barn until I found a folder marked in his handwriting, Lake Valve System, emergency use only. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams, notes, legal records. My family didn't just own land, we owned the water rights. When the resort was built in 2001, there was a handshake agreement to share usage. But the deeds? The source? Ours. Candace's guests were sipping imported wine on lakefront patios, paid for with water piped in under a contract she'd never read. I sat there, stunned. My grandfather, the man who once fixed a combine engine with duct tape and chewing gum, had quietly outmaneuvered an entire luxury resort before it was even built. And here came Candace, armed with bylaws and bad taste, demanding I erase the very thing that made their empire possible. So I made a decision. I wouldn't fight Candace in her world of board meetings and decor standards. I'd let her win the paper battle. But out here, in the dirt and sweat and silence of this land, I held the only leverage that mattered. Literal leverage. A hidden valve, legally mine, capable of draining the lake they depended on. I called Maya Locke, my longtime friend and one of the few lawyers in town who still believed in things like land rights and decency. "Maya," I said, "I've got something to show you, and bring a copy of that water access agreement from 2001. She paused. "Is this one of those calls where I need to delete my browser history after?" I smiled. Nothing illegal, just enlightening. As I stood on that bridge, watching the moon ripple across the water, I knew one thing for certain. You don't mess with a man's land, his legacy, or his grandfather's bridge, especially when he's the one holding the plug. Turns out, when your grandfather builds something with both a wrench and a grudge, you better believe it comes with instructions. I spent the next morning in the barn, wading through a tornado of old toolboxes, moth-eaten ledgers, and a pile of documents labeled "Monetarisms Do Not Touch." Candace Edition. That's where I found it, hand-drawn blueprints, thick with red ink and suspicion. A full schematic of Sunset Lake's drainage system. According to his notes, Grandpa installed the valve in '92 after a freak storm nearly wiped out our orchard. One lever turn and the excess lake water would flush straight into the south fields. Legal, quiet, and effective. What Candace called an eyesore was actually a pressure release system engineered by a man who didn't trust weathermen or women in pantsuits. And now that I held the plans in my hands, I realized something else. The lake wasn't just pretty, it was tactical. That night, I turned the valve a quarter click and watched water trickle like truth leaking through a lie. By morning, the shoreline had dropped just enough to leave a water ring on the resort's dock, like a lipstick stain left after a kiss you regret. I reversed it fast, just testing, but the message was clear. I could drain their image like pulling a rug from under a party. The more I studied, the more I saw it wasn't just a valve, it was leverage, literal and legal. Grandpa wasn't flashy, but he planned for war in case peace ever got HOA'd. And now Candace had kicked that sleeping dog right in the teeth. The next move needed backup. And there was only one person I trusted to wield paperwork like a sword. Maya Locke. Maya had the patience of a saint and the sarcasm of someone raised on court transcripts and bourbon. She looked over the water deeds, the lake schematics, the old 1992 agreement with the Whitakers, and said, "Well, Jack, it's official. You don't just own the land, you own the wet stuff, too. They've been building their kingdom on borrowed hydration." I blinked. "You're saying the resort doesn't own any part of the lake?" "They rent the sparkle," she smirked. "But you hold the source, and that bridge? It's not a violation, it's a valve house, protected under utility exception clauses, section 14.2, my favorite number." With that one line, the balance shifted. I wasn't the farmer under siege anymore. I was the landlord of every cocktail glass filled at the resort's tiki bar. And Candace? She was about to find out her empire was balancing on an inch of water and a misread contract. A few days later, her white Mercedes rolled up again, dustier than usual, like the universe was finally throwing shade. She strutted up in her snakeskin heels, waving a new clipboard like a sword. "Mr. Ryland," she announced, "you've now accumulated $4,000, 0 cents in fines. Non-compliance with HOA directives will result in legal escalation." I gave her a smile that should have been in a history textbook under the section, "Men who already know they've won." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. I appreciate the reminder. I'll absolutely take care of it." Her eyes narrowed. "I hope that means removal by next Friday." "It does," I said. "Next Friday's going to be real memorable." And I meant it, but not the way she thought. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one holding a wrench and smiling politely. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bridge, blueprint in one hand, legal confirmation in the other. My grandfather's handwriting stared back at me. "Use with care. The lake giveth, and the lake taketh." I realized this wasn't about aesthetics or bylaws. This was about legacy. about someone trying to scrub away my family's fingerprints to make room for beachfront influencers and champagne fountains. Candace wanted compliance. What she was going to get was a lesson in consequences, delivered gently, legally, and with full HOA-approved timing. And the best part? I wouldn't need to lift a fist, just a lever. And next Friday was going to be very educational. And if you've ever dealt with someone who mistakes their clipboard for a crown, you already know. Sometimes the most polite nod is just the setup for the sweetest reversal. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button if you've ever smiled while sharpening a quiet plan. Because next Friday, it isn't just about tearing down a bridge. It's about what rises when history, leverage, and one rusted lever all come together. Lesson of the day: in a world run by titles and tantrums, real power doesn't shout. It waits beneath the surface. See you in next part, when the water decides to answer back. When you're facing an opponent who weaponizes bylaws like they're biblical commandments, you don't argue louder, you watch closer. So I installed 4 cameras around Sunset Lake, 1 under the bridge, 1 facing the resort, and 2 angled from the tree line to capture the daily hustle in paradise. This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern mapping. Within 3 days, I had a clearer picture of the resort's water habits than their maintenance guy probably did. The fountains ran on a 6 a.m. timer. The pools were topped off every evening. Jet skis were washed, rinsed, and baptized twice daily. Turns out luxury living is about as water-hungry as a fire in a cornfield. And every drop flowed through a pipe that ran beneath my land. I watched with fascination and a hint of guilty pleasure, like a man quietly holding a fuse while the party upstairs plays piano. But it's hard to plot sabotage when the collateral damage has a name and a baby at home. At the grocery store, I overheard 2 resort employees by the apples. One was a young guy in uniform, rubbing his temples like rent was overdue on his soul. "If they shut us down, I don't know what we'll do," he whispered. The older woman beside him just nodded, eyes sagging with fatigue. 20 years I gave that place. I can't start over now. I froze with a bag of carrots in my hand. These weren't Candace's people. These were my people. Folks who held down 2 jobs, tipped in cash, and showed up to shovel snow without being asked. It hit me then. If I pulled that lever too far, I wouldn't just empty a lake. I'd upend lives. I walked out without buying a thing, my appetite drowned under the weight of my own plan. And yet, I still went home and checked the valve. 3 days later, a gray SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a man in khakis with a name tag that read Community Compliance Officer, which is HOA speak for spy with a clipboard. He didn't ask permission, just started poking around like my garden was a crime scene. "I'm here to inspect irrigation infrastructure," he announced, as if I had invited him for tea. HOA Directive 7C14 grants access during compliance review windows. I said, "Funny, I thought the 4th Amendment was still in print." He didn't laugh, just scribbled something and moved toward the bridge. I stopped him. "Look, the system's delicate. One wrong move and we'll flood the tomato beds." He stared like I'd threatened national security. "No touching," I said. "Observe all you want, but if you break something, the HOA buys a truckload of compost." He paused and then backed off. I smiled. They were getting nervous. That meant I was getting close. To stall the demolition deadline, I played my part like a seasoned liar with a conscience. "Mrs. Whitaker," I told Candace the next time she arrived in her powdered SUV, "we're rerouting irrigation before removal. The bridge connects to pipework. If I yank it too early, I risk damaging crops." She didn't believe me, but she couldn't disprove it either. Bureaucrats hate uncertainty. She huffed something about procedural extensions and left. I waved sweetly, then turned my attention to the lever beneath the bridge. That night, under a full moon and with cameras rolling, I twisted it 1 notch, just 10%. The sound was subtle, like a sigh escaping the earth. In the morning, I checked the resort cameras. The lake had dropped an inch. By noon, 2. Just enough to mess with filtration, but not enough to raise eyebrows. It was working, as the valve wasn't just mechanical, it was surgical. a scalpel in the hands of someone tired of being polite. The bridge wasn't just wood anymore. It was a silent witness, a trapdoor, a trigger. Every day it stood, it reminded Candace she hadn't won yet, and every inch the water receded, it whispered to me, "You still hold the story's ending." But the longer I watched, the more I wondered, could I teach a lesson without burning the schoolhouse down? That's the tightrope I walked now, and if you've ever tried to teach respect to a bully with a clipboard and a luxury husband, you already know sometimes justice doesn't shout, it leaks. Quietly. Relentlessly. Just enough to make you wonder if it's all in your head, until your empire starts to buckle. If you've ever dealt with someone who hides behind rules while trampling over respect, then you know the quietest plans often leave the loudest impact. If this story made you pause, laugh, or even nod in quiet agreement, share it with a friend who's been bulldozed by a clipboard bully. Let them know they're not alone, and sometimes justice doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with a slow, steady leak. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to outsmart someone in silence? Because in the next part, the cracks start showing, on the lake, in the resort, and inside Candace's carefully curated empire. It's about to get a whole lot messier, and I wouldn't want you to miss it. There's something poetic about watching someone cheer for their own downfall. On the morning of Demolition Day, I shaved, put on my cleanest flannel, and made sure the cameras were rolling from every angle. I wanted history to remember that I was calm, cooperative, and, as far as the HOA could prove, completely within their rules. Candace pulled up at exactly 8:30 a.m. in her white Mercedes, dressed like she was about to christen a yacht, not supervise the destruction of a bridge. "Good morning, Mr. Ryland," she chirped, clipboard in hand, lips pressed tight in a victory smile. Rhett stepped out behind her, looking like a man who had been voluntold. "Today," she declared, "we do what's right for the community." I smiled warmly. "Absolutely, Mrs. Whitaker. Today we make history, just not the version she thought was getting written." I had hired a small construction crew to keep up appearances, 3 guys in hard hats who thought they were taking down a shed. I gave them specific instructions: knock out the outer supports, leave the center span for me. "Sentimental reasons," I told them. They nodded. The truth was simpler. The center beam held the master valve, and this whole demolition was less about compliance and more about choreography. As the crew hammered and splintered boards around me, I moved slowly, reverently, like a man saying goodbye to an old friend. Every strike was measured, every sigh rehearsed. Candace stood at a distance, taking selfies beside the mess, like she'd just cut a ribbon at a groundbreaking. Rhett tried to smile, but I could see the discomfort in his posture. He wasn't built for gloating. I almost pitied him. As I knelt beside the final plank, I felt the lever beneath my palm. It was still cool, still obedient, still waiting. I ran my fingers along the groove where my grandfather had etched 3 tiny notches, markings that lined up with the rotation range. I twisted it slowly, just past the first mark. A soft click. If you weren't listening for it, you'd miss it. I straightened up, looked at Candace, and said, "Last piece coming off now." She nodded eagerly, raising her phone to capture her moment of triumph. I raised the sledgehammer like a flag and brought it down on the final beam. Not hard enough to shatter, just enough to make it look like something had ended. And, in a way, it had. Underneath, the valve opened 100%, and the lake exhaled like it had been holding its breath for 30 years. For the next 20 minutes, nobody noticed a thing. I chatted politely with the crew, shook Rhett's hand, even posed for a photo with Candace, who insisted on documenting community progress. Meanwhile, below our feet, paradise was circling the drain. The first signs came subtle. A gurgle by the dock, a shift in the way the boats sat in the water, one of the fountains coughing like it had the flu. I thanked everyone, sent the crew off, and watched Candace drive away in blissful ignorance, her day made by the illusion of victory. I walked back to my porch, poured myself a cup of coffee, and waited. The cameras were still recording. The lake was already down 2 inches. The poetry was starting to write itself. That's the thing about control, real control. It doesn't need to shout. It lets people cheer while you quietly unscrew the foundation under their stage. Candace thought she'd erased history by forcing me to destroy my grandfather's bridge. What she didn't know was that bridge was never the threat. It was the key. And now that the key had turned the entire resort operation, every lounge chair, every luxury suite, every lakefront marketing promise was living on borrowed time. The plug had been pulled, and the countdown had begun. Sometimes the most dangerous compliance is the kind that smiles while holding the manual upside down. They thought they removed an eyesore. Turns out, they pulled the plug on their own illusion. Never underestimate the quiet man with a blueprint and a reason, because real power doesn't shout, threaten, or flaunt, it just waits. And when the time's right, it lets gravity do the talking. If this story struck a chord, or made you grin at the irony, send it to a friend who's ever been steamrolled by a rule enforcer in high heels. Drop a comment. What would you have done with the valve? Next part coming, and trust me, paradise is about to throw a tantrum. They thought it was over when the bridge collapsed. But bridges don't just connect land, they connect legacies. And when Candace Whitaker demanded the demolition, she wasn't removing wood. She was detonating the foundation of her own empire. I gave her exactly what she asked for. I smiled, nodded, and swung the hammer. What she didn't see was the lever, camouflaged in plain sight, and once the valve clicked, I didn't need to shout. I just waited. By breakfast the next day, the lake had already dropped 2 feet. The pool pump at Sunset Point started coughing like a hungover saxophonist. Jet skis sat like fat plastic ducks stuck in slush. A bachelorette live-streamed her meltdown. We paid for lakeside bliss, not a mud spa. Her tears were waterproof. Her Wi-Fi wasn't. I stirred my coffee and watched it all unfold on 3 different angles. My cameras, her TikTok, and the morning news. The only thing fuller than the resort's inbox was my satisfaction. Hashtags started sprouting faster than the resort's garden ever had. Draingate, Lake Whitaker no more, Colby, the Drain Slayer. Influencers fled, dragging designer suitcases through slop like it was a Netflix disaster movie. A couple filmed a time-lapse of the shoreline disappearing. Watch $5 million, 0 cents evaporate in 90 seconds. Candace, still dressed like a congressional intern on a power trip, paraded around the disaster site issuing citations to invisible violators. "This is unacceptable," she barked to no one. She weaponized bylaws like they were biblical commandments, but forgot the golden rule. By noon, media vans encircled the property like hyenas around a carcass. Local anchors called it an ecological misstep. One environmentalist dubbed it a freshwater Hiroshima. PETA released a statement about traumatized turtles. My phone buzzed every 30 seconds. Press, activists, lawyers, some HOA board members suddenly realizing they had skin in the game. I gave everyone the same response. I followed HOA orders. The bridge is gone. Just ask Candace. That's when Rhett showed up on my porch, tie loosened, face hollow. "Colby, I didn't know she'd take it this far," he said, eyes darting like a man dodging his own spine. "She's losing it, staff are quitting, bookings are canceled, it's a mess." I offered him coffee. "This started with a clipboard, Rhett. Maybe now you see why some things shouldn't be run like a middle school council." He looked like he might cry, then muttered, "I'll talk to her. Good luck, pal. You can't reason with a freight train in heels." 30 minutes later, her car screeched up like a bad plot twist. Candace jumped out, shoes sinking in mud, eyeliner sprinting for the hills. "You lunatic!" she screamed, storming onto my porch. "You destroyed a $5 million 0 cent resort!" I sipped my coffee. "No, ma'am, I removed an old wooden bridge. Per your official request." Her mouth flopped open like a beached bass. "You know what I meant." "No, I only know what you wrote. In triplicate." She flailed into a rant so aggressive it scared my porch swing. "You'll pay for this! Lawsuits! Jail time! You'll never own land again!" I didn't flinch. I simply stepped inside, came back with a folder, and handed it to her. Water rights, land surveys, drainage specs, signed, notarized, legal, all dated before your first Botox appointment. She didn't read them, just waved them like she was casting spells. You don't get to threaten the economy. Actually, you did that when you mistook authority for ownership. The standoff lasted 10 more minutes. Then I laid it out like a dinner bill. Public apology by 9 a.m., resignation from the HOA, and a signed agreement never to touch a twig on my property again. Her mascara dripped, her mouth twitched, her pride battled her panic and lost. You can't blackmail. You're not worth blackmail. I'm just offering you a way out. Rhett arrived just in time to hear her crumble. Fine, she muttered, voice cracked like lakebed clay. But I'm not doing it because of you. I nodded. Of course not. You're doing it because the lake can still fall another 6 feet. That night, the resort looked like a haunted Instagram post. String lights blinked over cracked mud. Half the staff was gone. The rest? Overworked, underpaid, and questioning every life choice that led them to Sunset Point. Rhett sent a desperate email asking if we could at least slow the drain. I replied with a screenshot of the HOA's demolition order, highlighted in 4 colors. Beneath it, I typed, "You got what you demanded. This is just the invoice." By midnight, TikTok had cannibalized the event. Someone dubbed the chaos with dramatic violin music and turned Candace into a meme. AKA Karen versus hydraulic karma. Millions watched. Even my nephew in Chicago texted, "Uncle Jack, you're trending." And yet, inside me, the high started to flicker. Not guilt, exactly. More like a long breath after a fight, because I wasn't sure anymore who I was proving this to. Candace? The town? Myself? At 3 a.m., I stood at the edge of the muddy lake, flashlight flickering across dead fish, lost sunglasses, and sunken paddle boats. The valve still hissed faintly, a mechanical whisper that didn't care who was right. I remembered Grandpa's words written on the blueprints, "In emergencies only." This had become something else. Not survival, not flood control, just proving a point sharp enough to cut the hand that held it. So I made a decision. If Candace showed up at 9 a.m. and did what she promised, I'd shut it off, let the lake come back, let the ecosystem breathe again. But if she didn't? Well, then she'd have made her choice, not me, and the consequences would be her final legacy. By sunrise, a crowd had gathered. Journalists, locals, and a few brave influences in waterproof boots. All waiting. Some for answers, others for drama. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, wondering which version of Candace would show up, if any. Rhett paced near the shoreline, checking his watch every minute like it owed him something. The cameras were rolling, the birds were watching, and the water? It was still slipping away, inch by inch, like patience with a tyrant. This wasn't just about who owned the shoreline, it was about who owned their choices. This wasn't revenge anymore, this was ritual, a final offering to every small-town soul who ever got bulldozed by HOA arrogance in a pantsuit. And as the sun climbed over the tree line, I whispered to myself, "Be careful what you wish for, Candace, you might just flood yourself with it." They say heroes get statues, but around here, they get subpoenas. After Candace skipped town with the grace of a raccoon in a Gucci bag, I had about 3 days of small-town glory. People bought me drinks, someone baked a Lake Avenger pie, but the celebration dried up faster than the shoreline. Turns out, draining a lake has consequences when half the town works at a resort now covered in fish bones and bankruptcy notices. The media flipped faster than a diner pancake. Yesterday's folk hero was today's environmental arsonist. Local business owners started avoiding eye contact. Parents glared at me in the grocery aisle. The guy at the gas station who once offered me free coffee now rang me up like I was contagious. Even Rhett, who'd cried on my porch, started hedging his public support. Jack meant well, he told reporters, but the results speak for themselves. I didn't fight it. When you torch a house, you can't complain about the smoke. So I did the one thing Candace never could. I took responsibility. I held a press conference on my own porch. Told them I'd fund the lake restoration myself with every dime of savings and a new mortgage on the farm. I met with EPA officials, community leaders, and even that twitchy TikTok bride. I let pride steer the wheel, I admitted, and now I'm the one who's going to fill this lake, bucket by bucket if I have to. Turns out, honesty works better than bulldozers. The shift didn't happen overnight, but folks started showing up. A laid-off lifeguard became our water quality technician. A former concierge ran logistics. I hired Lisa, a school teacher who'd helped organize the volunteer cleanup, to run community outreach. She was smart, steady, and had a smile that made you want to apologize for every dumb thing you ever did. We planted reeds, reinforced the shore, and watched water slowly return like forgiveness you didn't think you deserved. Every shovel of dirt was part penance, part promise. 3 months later, the lake was back, not identical but stronger. We opened it to the public, fishing piers replaced docks, trails wound through wildflower fields. The resort's old main hall became a community learning center. We held workshops on ecology, water stewardship, and how not to weaponize a homeowners association. Rhett, to his credit, stayed, helped manage the programs, said he wanted to teach his kids what leadership actually looked like. I said, just show them what their mom didn't. And then, like a wine stain at a baptism, Candace returned. New car, new purse, same scowl. She strutted into the grand reopening like she'd been invited, except no one clapped, no one bowed, and no one asked her opinion on anything. She sniffed around like she expected a throne. All she found was a recycled bench with her name scratched off. This place used to be elegant, she sneered. I smiled. Now it's useful. She tried to rally a few old allies, but they were too busy planting trees and guiding tours. Her power had drained with the lake, and unlike me, she didn't know how to build anything that didn't start with a threat. In the end, Candace didn't stay, left without ceremony, just an echo in a town that had outgrown her noise. I didn't celebrate. I just felt relief. The kind you get when a headache leaves quietly. Last month, I married Lisa by the new footbridge. My stepson held the rings, grinning like he knew this was his real inheritance. As we crossed the bridge together, hand in hand, I told him the story, not of the fight, but of the rebuild. How anger built the lever, but love laid the boards. How sometimes you have to break what's rotten to make room for something that lasts. He asked, "Will the lake ever drain again?" I said, "Not while people care more about each other than rules." So here we are. One bridge down, a better one up. Not perfect, but shared. The lake's surface now reflects more than clouds. It reflects lessons. The kind you don't learn from citations or fines, but from getting your hands dirty and your heart humbled. That's where real power lives, not in valves or votes, but in the quiet courage to fix what you break. The strange part? I don't regret draining the lake. I regret not realizing sooner that winning a war doesn't mean peace follows. What I drained wasn't just water. It was years of suppressed resentment, decades of condescension, and every inch of Candace's entitled ambition. But what I filled afterward? That took more strength. It took humility. Neighbors who once gave me side eyes now show up with casseroles and ask how the turtles are doing. Kids run around the lake like it was never empty. Tourists still come, but not for luxury. They come for lessons. The Learning Center hosts field trips, restoration classes, and civic seminars titled How Not to Be a Candace. It's a hit. Lisa designed a small garden near the bridge, filled with native plants and a sign that reads, "From wreckage to roots." I walk by it every day. Not to admire, but to remember, to remind myself that revenge is loud, but restoration is patient, that bridges don't hold grudges, they hold weight. One night, Rhett and I sat on the porch, watching the moon ripple across the lake. He asked, "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't pulled that lever?" I sipped my drink. Yeah, probably still be fixing fences while Candace installs flamingo statues with a ruler. We both laughed, and for once, it felt clean. So if you're still watching this story, maybe you're dealing with your own HOA tyrant, or maybe you're the tyrant and you just don't know it yet. Either way, learn from this. Sometimes power isn't taken, it's relinquished by those too blind to see they never deserved it. And the best revenge? It isn't flooding the enemy, it's becoming someone they could never be, respected, redeemed, and still standing when their empire sinks. The last nail in Candace's coffin wasn't legal. It wasn't loud. It was the silence that met her return. No applause, no fear, no relevance. That's the cruelest truth for people like her, not that they're hated, but that the world moved on without them. And if you've ever been underestimated, overruled, or outmaneuvered by someone with a clipboard and a god complex, remember this: legacy isn't what you demand, it's what's left standing when your title's gone. And as I stood there, on that new bridge, with my stepson beside me and Lisa's voice echoing from the garden, I realized something. The bridge we built wasn't just wood, nails, or permits. It was proof. Proof that dignity can outlast ego, that redemption can outrun revenge, and that when you stop fighting to be right, you might just start building something worth standing on. The water below shimmered like a clean slate, not just for the lake, but for me. Because the story wasn't about draining a lake. It was about draining arrogance. It was about facing the wreckage your pride caused and saying, okay, now let's fix it. It was about learning that real leadership doesn't wear a title or swing a gavel. It rolls up its sleeves and listens. So if this story made you think maybe about your own HOA war, or just the battles we pick when pride shouts louder than reason, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a friend with their own clipboard tyrant, or someone who forgot that rebuilding is harder but braver than revenge. And before you go, drop a comment and let us know, what's the biggest lesson you took from this? Would you have pulled the lever? Hit that like button if this story reminded you that bridges matter more than fences. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just help you win your own quiet war with your land, your legacy, or your HOA president. Because around here, we don't just tell stories. We settle scores with justice, wit, and sometimes a hidden valve system.